when a veteran and his loyal dog stumble upon a buried armored truck deep in the Ozark forest. They uncover a secret the whole town tried to hide for 38 years. But when the truth surfaces, so do the killers. Subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Ozarks at dawn were a canvas of mist and muted gold. The forest breathed in slow, steady rhythms, the hush between heartbeats of the world. Arthur "Art" Corrigan stood at the edge of a narrow ravine, his boots sinking into damp clay, his breath forming pale ghosts in the crisp air. At his side, the German shepherd named Fenrir waited in perfect stillness, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Art's hand tightened on the crowbar. What he was prying open wasn't a fallen locker or a forgotten safe. It was a door, fused shut by rust and time, buried under layers of mud and rock. He'd already spent 2 hours carving through the hardened earth, driven by equal parts curiosity and instinct. Fenrir's earlier growl, low, warning, almost human in its unease, still echoed in Art's mind. The dog never growled without reason. He wedged the iron bar deeper into the seam and pushed with all his weight. The metal groaned, a deep, ancient sound, as though the earth itself objected. Then came the crack, sudden, violent, and the door gave way with a shriek that scattered the birds from the trees above. A wave of fetid air struck him full in the face. It smelled of rot, mildew, and something older, the scent of sealed decay. Art staggered back, covering his mouth with his sleeve. Fenrir barked sharply, pacing in a small circle, tail stiff and hackles raised. When the stench subsided, Art lifted his flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkness, a pale tunnel of light revealing what the earth had hidden for decades. At first he thought it was a bunker, steel walls, reinforced seams. Then the details emerged. A steering column, shattered glass, and seats. 2 of them, occupied by the skeletal remains of men who'd once worn uniforms. Art froze. The uniforms were too decayed to read fully, but the faded emblem on one sleeve still clung stubbornly to the fabric, a sterling security patch, a company he recognized, Private Cash Transports. He'd seen their trucks on highways for years. He moved closer, scanning the floor. The beam caught the dull glint of brass, spent shell casings scattered across the steel plating. Near the back, a rusted shotgun leaned against the wall, its barrel warped by age. The door of the internal safe was torn open, hinges mangled. Whatever had been inside was long gone. Fenrir whined softly. Art followed the sound. The dog was sniffing under the driver's seat, pawing at something wedged in the corner. Art crouched and shone the light. There, half buried in grime, lay a small silver object. He pried it free and wiped it against his sleeve. A Zippo lighter, tarnished but intact. 2 engraved initials shimmered faintly beneath the dirt. DM. For a long moment, Art said nothing. The forest outside was utterly still, as though holding its breath. He turned the lighter over in his hand, the cold metal biting against his skin. He'd spent years running from the chaos of the world, from wars, orders, loss. The Ozarks had been his refuge, but now, standing before the metallic tomb of strangers long dead, he felt the pull of something he couldn't ignore. Duty, maybe. Or guilt. He didn't know which. He stepped back out of the steel vault, the flashlight beam wavering across the trees. The evening sun was dying, staining the ravine with bruised light. He looked once more at the open door, the dark maw of it gaping like a wound in the earth. "Whatever this is, boy," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "It was meant to stay buried." Fenrir pressed against his leg, eyes still locked on the darkness below. Art covered the entrance with branches and soil, not to hide his discovery from others, but to buy himself time to understand it. When he finally climbed the ravine's edge, the air felt heavier. The woods were no longer his sanctuary. Something unseen was awake down there, and he had disturbed it. That night, as he sat by the campfire, the lighter lay on the table beside him, its engraving catching the glow of the flames. The initials DM reflected back at him like an accusation. Art tried to sleep, but the forest whispered. Every crack of a branch, every sigh of the wind sounded deliberate. Fenrir lay close, his head resting on Art's boots, ever watchful. When dawn came, the decision was already made. He packed his gear, slid the lighter into his pocket, and looked out at the mist curling through the trees. He didn't know who DM was, or why 2 men had died locked in a vault in the heart of the Ozarks. But he knew this much. The truth hadn't died with them. It was waiting, buried under rust and silence. And Art Corrigan had just given it breath again. Harmony Creek looked harmless at first glance. A sleepy settlement tucked between the folds of the Ozark Hills, where time seemed to have lost interest. The streets were quiet, lined with fading storefronts, whose sun-bleached signs told stories of better years. The air smelled faintly of rain and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. Arthur Corrigan parked his old Ford by the curb and sat for a moment, staring at the lighter resting in his palm. The initials, DM, caught the light again. They felt heavier today, as if they carried a memory of blood and betrayal. Fenrir shifted on the truck seat beside him, watching the town through the windshield. "All right, partner," Art muttered. "Let's see what this place is hiding." The public library was small, a squat brick building with fogged windows and a crooked flagpole. Inside, it smelled of dust, old paper, and lemon polish. The librarian, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned tightly and a gaze sharp as wire, looked up from her desk as Art entered. Her nameplate read, Alara Gable. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but wary. "Can I help you with something?" Art returned a courteous nod. "Name's Corrigan. I'm doing some research. Local history, mostly. Old transportation routes, 1980s. I'm particularly interested in the Harmony Creek area." Her eyes narrowed slightly behind her half-moon glasses. "That's a rather specific interest, Mr. Corrigan." "I'm a history buff," Art said, forcing a faint smile. "Just trying to understand how these roads connected through the forest back then." For a moment, she seemed to weigh his words, then nodded slowly. "Newspapers are on microfilm," she said, rising from her chair. "Back room, second door. I'll bring you the reels for 85 through 90. She returned a minute later with 3 labeled boxes and left him with the creaking hum of the microfilm reader. Art scrolled carefully, the machine's small light flickering across his face. Articles about local fairs, timber rights, hunting regulations, until one headline stopped him cold. "Armored vehicle vanishes on rural route. September 1987. Sterling Security Transport disappears en route to Springfield. Cargo estimated at $5 million. Crew of 2, David Miller and Frank Collins, presumed dead." The piece went on. No ransom demands. No evidence of crash. Search efforts suspended after 2 weeks. He leaned closer, reading the faded print until his eyes burned. 2 men. 2 skeletons. The match was perfect. He scrolled further through the following months. The story grew smaller, then vanished entirely by winter. Buried, just like the truck. Someone had wanted it forgotten. Art left the library with the lighter heavy in his pocket. Across the street stood a diner, Creekside Cafe, the only place in town showing signs of life. Through the fogged window, he could see 3 men at the counter, their heads bent in slow conversation. The smell of coffee and bacon hit him as he stepped inside. The man behind the counter was thick-set, with graying hair and an expression carved from habit and fatigue. His name tag read, Stan. "What can I get you?" he asked, voice low and steady. "Coffee. And maybe some of that pie," Art replied, settling into a booth by the window. Stan poured the coffee without a word. The other men at the counter barely glanced up. Art waited until the first sip had cut through the road dust in his throat before he spoke again. "I was just over at the library," he said lightly, "looking through some old papers. You folks have quite a history out here. Logging, mining, even a few mysteries." Stan's rag froze mid-wipe on the counter. "Mysteries?" "Yeah," Art continued, pretending not to notice the shift. "There was something about a missing armored truck. Back in '87, I think. Hell of a story. Never found, right?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. One of the men at the counter set down his fork, his jaw tightening. Another stood up quietly and left. Stan stared at Art for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its earlier warmth. "People around here don't dig up old graves," he said. "Not smart to go poking at things that don't concern you." Art met his gaze evenly. "Maybe. But sometimes graves dig themselves up." The two men locked eyes for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then Stan forced a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Anything else for you, mister?" "No," Art said, finishing his coffee. "That'll be all." He paid in cash, left a generous tip, and walked out into the afternoon light. The quiet main street felt different now, heavier, watchful. The friendly mask of Harmony Creek had slipped just enough to show the rot beneath. Back in his truck, Fenrir raised his head and growled softly, eyes fixed on the diner window. Behind the glass, Stan stood motionless, staring after them, his face unreadable. "Yeah," Art murmured, starting the engine. "I saw it too." He drove until the town disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by the endless whispering pines of the forest. For a while, the rhythm of the road calmed him. But when he turned onto the dirt track leading to his campsite, a cold ripple of unease ran through him. Something was wrong. He slowed the truck and killed the engine. The forest was silent, too silent. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Then he saw it. At the center of his makeshift table, a hunting knife driven deep into the wood, its hilt quivering slightly from the force of the strike. It wasn't one of his. Fenrir let out a low, guttural growl, the sound vibrating through his chest. Art's eyes swept the clearing. Near the edge, faint boot prints marked the soft soil. 2 sets, large and deliberate. Whoever had been here hadn't stolen anything. They'd left something instead. A message. He pulled the knife free and studied it. The handle was carved from deer antler, the blade clean and polished, not old. Locally made. A warning from people who wanted him to understand. "We know where you are." "Looks like we stirred the hornet's nest, boy," Art muttered, tossing the knife into his gear bag. Fenrir's ears twitched. The illusion of peace was gone. Art crouched, pressing his palm into the fresh boot prints. The soil was still soft, maybe an hour old at most. Whoever had come here knew exactly where to find him, and they hadn't been afraid to show it. He stood, his expression hardening. "All right," he said quietly. "If they want a game, we'll play it our way." That night, beneath a sky thick with restless stars, Art worked in silence, moving his truck, dismantling the tent, camouflaging what remained. Fenrir followed each motion without command, his instincts mirroring his handler's unease. By the time the moon rose high above the trees, the campsite no longer looked like a place where anyone lived. It looked like bait. Art sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark line of the woods. Somewhere out there, in the distance between one breath and the next, he knew someone was watching. Harmony Creek had spoken, not with words, but with a knife. And now, Arthur Corrigan was done asking politely. The morning broke, gray and heavy, the kind of light that never quite reaches the ground. Arthur Corrigan sat crouched near the dying embers of his fire, his coffee untouched, his thoughts sharp as the blade of his field knife. The night had been long, too long, every sound amplified by tension. Somewhere between the whisper of the wind and the pulse of his heartbeat, the forest had become enemy territory. Fenrir sat close, muscles tight, eyes fixed on the tree line. The dog had sensed it too, the subtle shift, the feeling of being watched. Art ran through his mental checklist the way he had in combat zones years ago. Perimeter, secure. Vehicle, concealed. Exit route, mapped. Weapon, ready. He could almost hear his old sergeant's voice in his head. If you think you're safe, you're already dead. He rose, slinging his pack over one shoulder. Let's move, boy, he murmured. We're not staying blind. The ravine was 10 miles north, deep in the heart of the woods, hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and years of silence. The hike was grueling, the air thick with humidity, the forest floor slick with rot and moss. Fenrir led, pausing now and then to test the wind, his nose low to the ground. When they reached the spot, the scene was unchanged. The camouflaged pile of branches still covered the entrance to the armored vehicle. Art exhaled slowly, relief tinged with suspicion. Whoever had left that knife hadn't followed him here. Not yet. He cleared the cover, revealing the gaping steel door and the darkness beyond. The stench of decay was weaker now, but still there, a memory that refused to fade. Fenrir stood at the threshold, tail low, growling deep in his throat. Art flicked on his flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut across the same frozen tableau, the two skeletons slumped in their seats, the shell casings, the torn safe. But today he wasn't here to stare at ghosts. He was here to look deeper. He crouched near the driver's seat where he'd found the lighter. Something about the floor felt wrong, a dull, hollow note when he tapped it with the butt of his knife. He ran his fingers along the seams, feeling for irregularities. There, a faint rectangular outline, barely visible under layers of grime and corrosion. His pulse quickened. He took out the crowbar and began working at the edges, scraping away rust and dirt. Every motion was slow, precise. The old steel resisted, then groaned, giving way by inches. Finally, with a dull metallic crack, a section of the floor lifted free. Beneath it lay a cavity wrapped in what had once been a waterproof tarp. Inside were stacks of packages, neatly wrapped and sealed with thick black tape. Art didn't need to open them to know. Money. He sliced through the outer plastic. Inside were vacuum-sealed bundles of $100 bills, perfectly preserved. The ink was still green, the paper crisp despite the years. He counted quickly. Dozens of bundles, maybe more. 2 million, give or take, he whispered. Fenrir whined softly behind him. It made sense now. The bodies, the missing truck, the silence in town. Someone had stolen the money, hidden it here, and silenced everyone who got too close. He took one bundle, sealed it in his own waterproof bag, and slid it into his pack. Evidence. Proof. He replaced the floor panel and scattered grime over it until it looked untouched. Then he turned to leave, and froze. Fenrir was growling again, low and steady, his gaze fixed on the tree line outside the open door. Art listened. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of engines. Not one, but two. Heavy and close. Tires on gravel. He killed the flashlight and slipped into the shadow near the entrance. The growl of the engines grew louder, echoing through the ravine. "They're coming," he whispered. Fenrir stayed motionless, ears pricked forward. Through the trees, 2 black SUVs appeared, glossy, powerful, and out of place in this wilderness. They stopped at the edge of the ravine, engines idling. 2 men stepped out, both armed. One was tall, muscular, his shaved head glinting in the light. The other, leaner, younger, with a trimmed beard and hard eyes, carried a rifle with professional familiarity. Art's pulse slowed. His training took over. No panic, no hesitation. Observe. Assess. Move. He slipped silently out of the armored vehicle, crouching low as he signaled Fenrir with a hand gesture. The dog obeyed instantly, staying close to his left leg. Together they moved up the slope of the ravine, staying within the shadows of the trees. "Spread out," he heard one of the men say. "He's here somewhere." The bearded one, the leader, spoke again, his voice sharp. "Remember what Murphy said. No mistakes this time." Murphy. The name hit Art like a spark in dry grass. So that was it. The man behind it all. The one who'd built a life on blood and silence. The driver's footsteps crunched on gravel. Too loud, too close. Art's eyes flicked toward a fallen log 10 feet ahead. Perfect cover. He and Fenrir moved like ghosts, slipping behind it just as the man came into view. The driver scanned the clearing, his rifle at the ready. He stepped closer to the armored vehicle, muttering a curse under his breath. "This is it. Same damn spot." Then came the shout from the other man. "Miller, watch your 6." Miller, so that was his name, spun, but too late. Fenrir burst from behind the log, a blur of motion and teeth. He went for the rifle hand, clamping down on the stock, twisting it free. Miller screamed, stumbling back. Art was already moving. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling. The rifle clattered to the ground. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, the second man firing wildly into the trees. Bullets shredded bark inches from Art's head. He grabbed Fenrir by the collar and dove for cover, rolling behind a boulder. The forest exploded into chaos. Gunfire, shouts, the thunder of footsteps. Art's instincts screamed at him to run, but he knew better. Running straight meant dying tired. He needed to disappear. "Come on, boy," he whispered. They sprinted downhill through the thick undergrowth, cutting sharp turns, doubling back, leaving a trail only a trained soldier could navigate. Behind them, voices echoed, angry, frustrated, losing track of direction. When the sound finally faded, Art slowed. His lungs burned, sweat stinging his eyes. They had escaped, for now. An hour later, he found a narrow crevice in the side of a rocky bluff, hidden behind tangled vines. The space inside was barely large enough for one man and a dog, but it was dry, dark, and safe. He collapsed against the stone wall, chest heaving. Fenrir lay beside him, still alert, but exhausted. Art reached out and scratched behind his ear. "Good work, partner." The words sounded hollow, because deep down, Art knew the fight was far from over. He pulled out his pack and retrieved the waterproof bag. The bundle of cash glowed faintly in the dim light. Proof. Motivation. A death sentence if the wrong man found out he had it. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared into the darkness. Murphy. That name had been shouted with authority. Whoever this man was, he had soldiers, money, and reach. Art couldn't rely on luck anymore. He needed information and a plan. He took out his small satellite tablet, its green light flickering weakly in the gloom. Fingers flying across the screen, he searched through public records, old reports, business filings. Minutes later, he froze. Daniel Murphy, former deputy of Harmony County, retired in 1988, 1 year after the heist. Since then, founder of Murphy Construction and Development, holder of multiple real estate ventures, majority landowner around Harmony Creek, a local king, a man whose hands were clean because they'd been washed in stolen money. Art stared at the glowing name on the screen. DM, the lighter. The initials. The truth. He closed the tablet and leaned back against the rock, the storm inside him quieting into a single, focused thought. They had hunted him through the woods, threatened him, warned him to stay silent. Now he knew who to hunt in return. The rain came that night, hard and cold, washing through the Ozark forest like a confession. Arthur Corrigan crouched beneath a tarp of camouflage netting, watching rivulets of water run down his rifle's barrel. Beside him, Fenrir's coat was slick and dark, his yellow eyes unblinking in the gloom. They had been in position for hours, waiting. The cave had served its purpose, a place to rest, to think, to sharpen his instincts back to the edge they once had. Now, Art was done running. He opened his battered field journal and flipped to the last page. Written in the careful, precise handwriting of a man who planned wars, not words, were the coordinates, the armored truck's resting place. Beside it, another line, freshly scrawled. Murphy comes here himself. He glanced down at the silver Zippo lighter in his hand. DM, the same initials he'd found inside that steel coffin. It was more than an artifact now. It was bait. Art's plan was simple. The only thing stronger than Murphy's greed was his fear. And nothing frightened guilty men more than evidence resurfacing in daylight. He activated his satellite connection and sent an encrypted message to his old comrade, Mark Jensen, now an FBI agent stationed in Little Rock. Attached were coordinates, photographs, and a single sentence. 5 million never made it home. 2 men did, in pieces. The man behind it built Harmony Creek. The response came 5 minutes later. We're moving, but we need time. Don't engage alone. Art exhaled a quiet laugh. Time's the one thing I don't have, Mark. He disconnected and opened a local news blog on his tablet, Ozark Expose. It was run by a journalist named Taylor Briggs, a stubborn small-towner who'd written one too many stories about local corruption. Art uploaded a single photo, the lighter resting on his gloved palm, initials clear. Beneath it, he typed the caption, "Ask Mr. Daniel Murphy what he left behind in 1987. Some secrets don't stay buried." He hit send. Then he waited. By dawn, the storm had blown over. A bruised sky stretched over the hills, heavy with humidity. The world was quiet, too quiet, until the sound of engines came again, distant but familiar. Art rose slowly, binoculars in hand. Down the winding dirt road that led toward the ravine, 2 black SUVs were kicking up plumes of mud, the same kind as before. They took the bait, he murmured. Fenrir's tail flicked once. Art moved with precision. He had spent the night turning the ravine into a trap. Simple, effective, silent. Fallen logs blocked the lower path, forcing anyone who entered to use the narrow trail on the right. Hidden along that route, he had placed a line of snares, tripwires, and a small charge of signal flares. Not to kill, just to disorient. He positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the clearing where the armored truck lay half buried. The rising mist blurred the outlines of the steel shell below, making it look like some sleeping beast waiting to wake. The SUVs rolled to a stop. Doors opened. 3 men this time, 2 armed guards, and 1 older man in a long black coat, his silver hair catching the faint morning light. Even at this distance, Art recognized the posture, the self-assured lean of someone who believed he owned the land beneath his feet. Daniel Murphy. Art watched as Murphy walked slowly toward the armored truck, stopping just short of the open door. His voice carried faintly up through the trees. "I told you idiots to torch this thing years ago," he snapped at one of the guards. "You let it rot, and now some fool with a camera's making me famous." The guard shifted uneasily. "Sir, we checked the area. No one's been—" A sudden metallic click interrupted him. 1 step further, and the man triggered the first tripwire. The flare exploded in a burst of white light, followed by the deafening crack of echoing sound. The guards dove for cover, blinded. Murphy cursed, drawing a small revolver from his coat, scanning the tree line. Art raised his rifle but didn't fire. He wanted Murphy alive. He wanted him to speak. He called out instead, his voice steady and cold, echoing through the fog. 38 years is a long time to keep a secret, Murphy. The older man froze. Art stepped from behind the trees, rifle low but ready. Fenrir appeared at his side, silent and alert. "Who the hell are you?" Murphy demanded, eyes narrowing. "The man who found your graveyard," Art replied, "and the men you left in it." Murphy's face hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do." Art held up the lighter. The initials glinted in the pale light. "You dropped this, didn't you? Back when you put 2 bullets in your own guards and stole their haul. Funny thing about initials, they're harder to bury than bodies." Murphy's jaw twitched. He raised the revolver. "You don't understand, soldier. You think you're doing the right thing, but there's no right in this world. Just power and people too weak to take it." "Then maybe you're about to lose yours," Art said quietly. Murphy fired. The shot missed, barely shattering bark beside Art's head. Fenrir lunged, a flash of teeth in motion. The nearest guard tried to swing his rifle, but the dog hit him full force, driving him into the mud. The second guard fired wildly. Art rolled behind cover, the bullets tearing leaves around him. He moved fast, trained and deliberate. 2 shots, 2 targets. The guards went down, groaning but alive. Fenrir backed off, teeth bared, growling low. Murphy was backing toward the truck, his gun shaking now, his breath ragged. "Don't!" Art shouted. "It's over!" Murphy's foot hit the edge of the ravine. He hesitated, just long enough to see the truth settle in his eyes. He'd lost. "You think this fixes anything?" Murphy spat. "You think the world cares who I killed? They built this town on my money. My blood bought their peace." "You built it on theirs," Art said. Murphy opened his mouth to reply, but the sound that came wasn't words. It was the distant thump of helicopter rotors. He turned, just as a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, drop your weapon and step away from the vehicle." Murphy's eyes went wide. He turned back toward Art, rage twisting his face, then hurled the revolver aside and stumbled backward. His heel caught the edge of the steel door. For a split second, he flailed, arms wide, then disappeared into the darkness of the armored truck below. The sound of the fall was short. Final. Art lowered his rifle. Agents swarmed the clearing within moments. Black uniforms, helmets, tactical gear. Jensen was among them, shouting orders, his voice cutting through the noise. "Corrigan! You crazy bastard! You really did it!" Art exhaled slowly, exhaustion seeping through every muscle. "You took your time," Jensen grinned grimly. "You always did know how to light a fuse." They moved together toward the truck. Inside, under the pale beam of a flashlight, lay Murphy's body, twisted, lifeless, resting beside the bones of the men he'd betrayed. The circle was closed. Art stepped back, letting the agents handle the scene. He reached down and scratched behind Fenrir's ear. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes calm again. "You did good, partner," he whispered. As the FBI began cataloging evidence, the cash, the bodies, the weapons, Art turned toward the ridge. The first light of dawn was breaking over the hills, painting the forest in soft gold. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace. He'd spent his life digging through wars, through loss, through the wreckage of other people's lives. Now, here in the silent heart of the Ozarks, he'd finally unearthed a truth worth keeping. And for once, it didn't belong to the dead. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Harmony Creek was no longer the quiet, forgotten town Arthur Corrigan had first driven into. The news had spread like wildfire. federal agents swarming the forest, patrol cars sealing the roads, reporters gathering by the diner that once served only silence. What had slept beneath the Ozarks for 38 years was now awake, and it would never sleep again. Art stood near the armored truck, its steel wall stripped bare of rust and mystery. The FBI forensic team worked methodically, bagging evidence under the harsh glare of floodlights. Inside lay the final pieces of Daniel Murphy's empire: bones, money, and the man himself. Mark Jensen approached, mud caked up to his knees, clipboard in hand. "You sure you're all right?" he asked quietly. Art gave a dry half-smile. "I've been better." "You've also been worse," Jensen replied, scanning him from head to toe. "You realize you just pulled the thread on a whole damn network? Bank accounts, shell companies, bribed officials. This isn't just a murder case. It's a rot that runs through half the county." Art glanced toward the horizon, where mist still hung like ghostly smoke between the trees. "Then maybe it's time someone cleaned house." Jensen nodded. "It'll happen. People like Murphy always leave a trail. And now, we've got the map." He looked down at the metal lighter in Art's gloved hand. "You keeping that?" Art turned the lighter over once more. The initials DM were still faint beneath the grime. "No," he said after a moment. "It belongs in evidence. Let it speak where he can't." He handed it to Jensen, who slipped it into a bag marked Primary Exhibit A. The air around them was heavy with the noise of duty, cameras clicking, radios crackling, boots crunching on wet soil. But somewhere beyond it all, a deep calm had settled, the kind that follows storms. Fenrir lay beside the truck, head on his paws, finally resting. Every now and then, his ears twitched toward a sound no one else heard: the wind, the breath of the forest, the world turning quietly back toward balance. An agent approached, saluting Jensen. "Sir, the site's secure. We found the hidden compartment under the floor. $2 million in old bills, still intact. We're cataloging serials now." Jensen whistled softly. "Hell of a find." He turned to Art. "That enough proof for you?" Art's eyes hardened slightly. "Proof is one thing. Peace is another. Think you'll ever have it?" Art didn't answer right away. He walked toward the edge of the ravine, boots sinking into the wet clay. From there, he could see the patch of forest where his first shovel stroke had struck the metal weeks ago. Back then, it had just been curiosity, the spark of a man who thought he'd left the world behind. Now, it was something else entirely. He could feel the ghosts here, not in some supernatural sense, but in the weight of silence finally lifted. 2 men who died believing no one would ever know. A town that had sold its conscience to comfort. And 1 man, Daniel Murphy, who'd built his empire on stolen blood and lived long enough to die inside it. Art took a slow breath. The air was clean again. Jensen's voice broke the quiet. "You heading back to the cabin?" "Not sure yet," Art said. "Might go west for a while. Maybe somewhere flat, where the trees can't hide secrets." Jensen chuckled. "You'll get bored. Men like you always do." "Maybe," Art said, looking down at Fenrir. "But I think he's earned a vacation." Fenrir's tail thumped once in the mud, as if in agreement. They started walking toward the convoy of vehicles waiting up the trail. Reporters were already gathering behind the yellow tape, shouting questions Art had no interest in answering. He'd done his part. The rest belonged to them now. The lawyers, the cameras, the slow machinery of justice. As they passed the old diner, Art glanced through the window. Stan, the owner, stood behind the counter, eyes wide, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. Their gazes met for a split second, enough for Stan to look away. The mask of silence that had protected this town for decades had finally cracked. Outside, the streets were lined with people, some shocked, some angry, most confused. They weren't cheering. They weren't weeping. They were just watching, as if trying to decide whether to be grateful or afraid. Art didn't blame them. Truth has a way of leaving scars. By afternoon, he was back at his truck. The sun was breaking through the clouds, spilling gold over the highway. Jensen shook his hand firmly. "You did good, Art. Don't vanish off the grid again, all right?" Art smirked. No promises. The road stretched out ahead, long, quiet, free. Fenrir jumped into the passenger seat, curling up with a low sigh. Art started the engine, the old Ford grumbling like a tired horse. He took one last look at Harmony Creek in the rearview mirror, the town that had tried so hard to bury its sins, and then shifted into gear. As the miles rolled by, the forest thinned, replaced by open plains and sky. The world felt wider now, cleaner. In his chest, where the weight of guilt and war had once lived, there was only stillness. He reached over and scratched Fenrir behind the ear. "We did what we came for," he said softly. The dog's eyes closed, content. The sun sank low, turning the road ahead into a ribbon of fire. And as the last echoes of Harmony Creek disappeared behind them, Arthur Corrigan knew he hadn't just uncovered a crime. He'd dug up a part of himself he thought was gone. The soldier who believed that doing the right thing still mattered, even when no one was watching. The forest had given up its dead. And the living, finally, could breathe again. The truth buried in the Ozarks finally came to light. Justice was served, and peace returned to the forest. But some secrets, once unearthed, change those who find them forever. Subscribe for more stories like this. Leave a comment, and tell us where you're watching from.